let's let's move on to theme number 2 fast. Stat, right? Oh my heck. I'm gonna die as I watch. If I rewatch this, which I very rarely do, in fact, just remind me, don't rewatch this, Kris. Okay. All right. Theme number 2, folks. Happy election day. Okay, let's talk about binding. Yesterday, we talked about how to bind 120-degree corners, okay, instead of a perfect 90-degree, which is what we're used to. And today, well, and several of you asked for, oh, I'm still laughing over the number 1. Oh, sheesh. Several of you asked about how to join the ends of binding, and it's one of my favorite things that I love to do, and I love to do it without the assistance of any special rulers or anything like that. Now, when it comes to finishing binding on a quilt and joining those together, there are 100 different ways out there to do it. If you found a way that you absolutely love and works for you, then stick with it. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel, right? If it comes natural to you and you love it, do it the way that you're used to. But if you're not used to doing it, or I should say, if you don't love the way you do it, or you get confused every time, I hope this little tutorial today can help you in joining the ends of your binding. Okay, so let's go ahead. I'm going to just come right over here to my cutting mat. I quickly have this little quilt sandwich that I put together. And yes, before you say, oh my goodness, Kris, what were you thinking with that binding on the back? That looks atrocious. If you say that, I will agree with you. It looks terrible, right? This is just a sample, okay? This is just a sample. Alrighty, so don't worry about what's on the back. We're gonna look at this, what's on the front. I just grabbed some quick fabric scraps and put this together. And then we have binding, okay? Now, I'm going to assume that for this demo that we've already sewn on the binding on the front. We're gonna move it around to the back. We've done our mitered corners, okay? So that when we pull it back on top of itself, it just does this so nicely. There we go. So we talked a little bit about that yesterday. But the part that I want to focus on today is how do we join the ends of the binding. So how I do it is that I will always start my binding with about, I don't know, a 6 to 10 inch tail. Just flapping in the wind, okay? Just flapping in the wind. And in fact, I could even pull out a few more stitches. I know some of you are probably dying right now watching me pull this out. But let me give you more of a 6-inch tail there, okay? And when you start your binding, that is just as important as finishing it, because you're going to start right about there, a little bit before your, the end, and you're going to leave that tail flapping in the wind. That's really important. Also notice that my tail is cut straight. I don't have it at any kind of slant, okay? All right, then you've gone around all 4 corners, right? And you're ready to take it to the finish line. So we have this big piece that we're thinking, how do I connect this? I wonder if I show it this way, if it might be a little bit easier. I'm trying to find a good angle for you guys. Okay, there we go. Okay, so what I do is I lay my first piece nice and flat down against the quilt, and then I bring this one that I just finished sewing the seam over on top of it. Okay, just like this. Just like this. Okay. Now, The rule is with this kind of binding method, whatever size you would cut your binding is your magic number. Once again, whatever size you cut your binding, that's what I mean right here when I open this up. Whatever this size is, and I'm not sure what we cut this at. Let's see. It is, we cut it at 2 1/4. Okay. So whatever size is your binding, however wide it is the magic number. So what you'll do is you'll place this over top, and then do you see where these two pieces intersect? Okay, they cross over one another right here. Your goal then is to measure 2 1/4 inches over from where they intersect. Okay, again, the magic number was 2 1/4. So 2 1/4 inches over, I'm going to now cut that top piece. Okay, don't cut through all of them. Don't cut down here. We're just doing 2 1/4 inches over from here. So there's a few ways you could do that. You could get out a ruler, you know, and measure 2 1/4 inches over. Let's see, 1, 2 1/4, and I could draw a line right there. Some people will do it that way, measure over. But another really fast way to do this is, if you think about it, see all this extra that we've got over here? We're not going to need it, right? So what I'm going to do is actually cut a piece off. And if I open it up, guess what? My measurement is built right here, 2 1/4. So I could use a ruler, or I could take this piece, put it on top of my fabric where those two pieces intersect, and look, I now know where 2 1/4 inches is, and I trim that right off of there. Does that make sense? So just as a quick review, I keep this laying down. There's 6 to 8 inches flapping in the wind, but now it's no longer flapping. I'm going to have it nice and tight against my quilt. I'm going to bring this over top. Where these two intersect is where I measure over 2 1/4 inches. I got the 2 1/4 inches from how wide I had cut my binding. Let's say if you cut your binding 2 1/2 inches, then it would be 2 1/2 inches over. If you cut your binding 3 inches, it would be 3 inches over. Do you get the gist of what I'm saying? So here we go, 2 1/4 over. Again, I could measure with a ruler, 2 1/4, but I could make it really easy by just opening up a scrap of my binding, placing it on top where those two intersect, and now if I go like this, I can just cut off that excess, just like that. Okay, now I have the exact measurements I need. What do I do next? Well, we've got to have them join at on the bias. So we're doing it perpendicular to one another. So when I say that, I mean as if we were putting two pieces, well, yeah, we can do this, two pieces together, and one is going 90 degrees into the other, right? It's like an intersection at, you know, on the road. You have an intersection, and one street is going one direction and the other is going the exact opposite direction. All right, so that's what we're going to do here. We're going to make sure this is perpendicular to one another. So what I like to do is I put my hands in what I call the pockets. What do I mean by that? Well, I open up the pocket, and I open up the pocket with my fingertips inside. And this is why this is important. You got to have a lot of space here, because if you don't, it's really hard to get in your sewing machine. So if you need to rip out a few stitches to get it to go longer, it's totally okay to do that. Okay, so back again, this is right back on top of each other. I'm going to take my hands, put them in their pockets, and now I bring my left one up and my right one gives it a smooch. Okay, I know sometimes a lot of us get this confused and we get it kind of ski-wampus. So just remember, and it might take a little practice to remember, but hands in pockets, left hand goes up, right hand comes over to give it a smooch. And you know that it's correct when you have it perpendicular to one another. Okay, let's see, this is going in one direction and this is going in the opposite direction. So one more time and then we'll sew it. Okay, there we go. Hands in pockets, left arm up, right one comes over and gives it a smooch. So I'm going to then pin it. This is another really important thing that I have found to help me be more successful, is pinning this little part, because it's kind of twisty, so it gets kind of ski-wampus, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to pin it in 4 places. If I were just to, let me show you something, for example. If I were just to put a pin at a diagonal and then try and sew it, sometimes what will happen is, look, this gets off from the edge. There's no clean edge still there. It kind of goes and it slips. So I like to actually pin it in about 4 spots. And I know to some of you that may seem overkill, but I promise you're going to have really good results if you do it this way. So I'm going to place a pin going one direction and another pin right along the top here. It's like I'm creating a square with my pins. And I'm going to pin right here. And for good measure, this, like I said, it may seem a little tedious, but I promise it's not that bad. So do you see how I've created a square with my pins? So now the final thing is to join this with the sewing machine. And the way I want you to remember, and the dialogue I want you to have with yourself when you're at the machine, is that I want you to remember outside corner to outside corner. Okay? Like, say it with me. Outside corner to outside corner. If you will remember that, then you won't go in the wrong direction. So what do I mean by outside? I'm going from here to here. If I were to start with the inside corner, then what's going to happen is I'm going to flip it out and it's going to be, it's not going to look right. It's not going to lay nice and flat. So outside corner to outside corner. If you feel more comfortable, like drawing a line there at this point, you certainly could do that. All right. So, but you don't have to. Sometimes we can just kind of eyeball this, right? Now, some may get a little, let's see. I'm going to grab a little marker here so you can see this. Sometimes when we go from outside corner to outside corner, we have trouble seeing where that outside corner is. And if that's you, don't be afraid to take a little pin and just put a little dot there. Okay, it's just a tiny little dot. Do you see that? I put a dot where my outside corner was because it's covered up and I might have a hard time seeing it. So if I have just a little marking right there, then I know where my outside corner is. I know where my outside corner is here. Now I'm going to take it to the machine and stitch along that. Okay, so let's do that right now. Let me get my machine kind of set up for that. There we go, and I want to make sure it's in the center position. Okay, here we go. And once I start sewing, I can get those pins out of the way if I want to. Make sure everything is nice and flat. And I'm just eyeballing this. I can see where my corner is. That's why I was so glad that I did that. And there you have it. Okay. Now, here's another important tip. Do not cut this until you've made sure that it is going the correct direction. We've all been there, right? So, before you cut off the excess, because that's what you do, you cut off the excess just a 1/4 inch beyond, but before you do that, fold it out and make sure that it's laying the correct way. And sure enough, it is. So I'm like, oh, okay, sweet. I can cut that off now. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to trim this up with some scissors. And there we go. Another thing I do like to do is I like to press the seam open. Okay, I'm just going to give it a little finger press right now. Let me do this on the table so you can all see. Okay, so I'm doing a little finger press to open up the seam. And now I'm going to fold it back in place like normal. And look at that. It fits right in. And now you cannot see where the beginning and where the end was. Here it is. See how it just folds right back in. And now all you have to do is take it back to the machine. You could place a few pins in it if you wanted to. And just take it back to the machine and stitch it down. Okay, and that's how easy it is to join the ends of binding. Woo, we did it. What do you think? And what questions do you have? What can I help answer? Okie dokie. Like I said, you know, some people have different ways of doing it. It's perfectly okay. Whatever way that you feel most comfortable with is what you should do. Okay. See, some of you have used this method before. Yay. Yeah, let me tell you, I have tried so many different methods of being able to do binding. And for me, I have felt that this was like so much more straightforward. I have tried, have you tried where you have an opening and then you tuck that binding into the opening, kind of like an envelope? I do not like that method at all, because what ends up happening is you have so much bulk right there in the same place. So this allows you to just spread out those seams. You can't see where you started and where you ended, and it works beautifully. Okay, yay! So Rebecca loved using the fabric piece for the width. Absolutely. I also, for club members, I have a video tutorial inside the club on just this, which is helpful for, like, if you're in a project and you want to, like, now how was it that she did that? You can just go straight to the club, go to the QC vault, which is our quick clip library, and in 2 minutes or less you'll be able to see how that's joined again. Okay. Oh, yay, Julie. Julie was in one of my classes in Sandy. She says, I love your technique. I've been doing it since you first showed it to us. Binding is not stressful right now. Stressful now, which I'm so glad to hear that, because I love to do binding, and it used to be stressful. And what I like to tell people is that I know that this is kind of crazy to say, but I used to pay someone to do binding for me because I just hated it and despised it that much. It was not my favorite thing. And one day I finally woke up and said, you know, Kris, you ought to just give it a try and try out different methods and see what works best for you, you know. And ever since I've done that, I have loved binding. And actually, binding happens to be, this may sound weird, but it happens to be my most favorite part of the whole quilt. I don't know why. It just is. To me, it's very relaxing. Sharon said she loves doing binding this way. It eliminates that bump where the binding pieces join. Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. Sue, that's your go-to method. Yay! For Cindy, it was a great refresher. I'm so glad. Cheryl asked, do you press all of the binding open? Yes, I do. I like to press it all open. Just gives it a nice flat look all the way around. Oh, thank you, Margene. And let's see. Thank you, Melinda. I agree, Sherry. I'm like the same way. She said, when my results finally get right, I jump up and down for a few minutes. Yes, 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 yes. Yeah, I'm right there with you, my friend. For sure. Okay, let's see. All right. Yeah, try it with pins next time. If you're having trouble with it, kind of going, how do you like those sound effects? Eep. If it goes eep, then you better do a little bit of pinning, right? Yeah. Good, 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 good. Okay. Laura has a question. Does the tip about the back and front of the corners being offset from yesterday's on the 120-degree corner apply to all corners when binding? Yes. I have found that to be very helpful, Laura, when doing, it doesn't matter what degree of angle it is. Yesterday, for those of you who might not have been with us, we talked about 120-degree angles. And we talked about, a specific way to do that. But what Laura is referring to is what I mentioned at the end, that when you're turning that mitered corner over, whatever is on top on the front should be the bottom layer on the back, and whatever's the bottom layer on the front should be the top layer on the back. Then you have a really nice, beautiful miter. And so yes, Laura, it is on everything. So, oh, good. Janet said, I like your technique better than the one I've been doing. Similar, but looks easier. Awesome. I am so glad to hear that, Janet. Okay, and yeah, some of you may use the binding tool. I had the binding tool for a long time, but I would always forget how to use it for some reason. So that's why I was like, no, I'm just not going to use the tool. I'm going to just try and figure this out. And but if the binding tool works for you, that is wonderful, because a lot of people swear by it for sure. So, all righty. Let's see. Yeah, you could definitely do that. Lynn said, I like to throw a wonder clip on the quilt so the strips have more wiggle room with the binding strips. Yeah, a lot of people really enjoy those binding clips as well. Okay, so yep, Janet says, I do mine just like this. I love binding quilts. It is relaxing. It really can be. It really is, for sure. Okay, so that was theme number 2. I hope you were able to learn to, oh, I didn't even bring over the number 2. There we go. It's kind of how my day is going. Number 3. All right, theme number